Welcome to the New School. I am Karen Cooney. I'm the director of the Viralist Center for Art and Politics here at the New School, and really delighted to present to you seminar number 3 of an ongoing series dedicated to freedom of speech. Freedom of Speech is a program that we have co-curated and co-developed with Laura Rajkovic, who is right here, and will offer closing remarks while I offer a couple of introductory comments. The seminar today is entitled Pervasive and Personal Observations on Free Speech Online, and I think you'll hear much more than just observations, but very pronounced positions from our fantastic panelists. It will be essentially a discussion on forums of free expression, and with the acknowledgement and with the clear understanding that a forum and a space and a site is never completely free. It is never private. It is never the same thing to everyone. It is not equitable, and is different at any given moment. And that gives me a brief segue into an acknowledgement of the land that we are standing on here, which is originally was inhabited by the Lenape Indians and is not ours either. Guidance through today's discussion on online freedom of speech is provided by Article 19. They are a partner organization in this seminar series together with 3 other organizations. And I just want to thank them. There is the National Coalition Against Censorship, there is Weeksville Heritage Center, and then the third one is the New York Peace Institute. And again, Article 19 has conceptualized and invited most of the speakers today. So I'm incredibly grateful to them, as they will help us navigate this blurry and particularly contested territory of online spaces. Article 19 is a formidable force in the field of advocating for freedom of speech, and does so internationally, and is a wonderful match to the National Coalition Against Censorship that does the same or very similar work here nationally in this country. Tonight the focus is again on the risks of online spaces, but also how to mitigate these risks, and the strategies that are being offered tonight will vary from a very hands-on, probably more activist procedures, to more artistic ways of using and taking control of the space. A subversive infiltration of space, I think, is one position that we'll hear about later on. The format of our seminars is kind of informed by the New School and the university here, so if you've done your homework, you would have come across some readings which are posted online. They're also sent to all the people who register. There are video documentations of previous seminars, there is a reading list, and there are very brief summary comments. And all of this to facilitate an ongoing conversation with you all across time and in different spaces here at the New School. The model for this seminar series is one that we've employed in a number of other programs at the Viralist Center. One was dedicated to notions of indigeneity. It was called Indigenous New York. We've also done a program series or seminar series on cultural boycotts, and eventually that series became an anthology, and we're working on a book that would accompany freedom of speech as well. A brief word for those who haven't heard it yet about the origin of freedom of speech, or the series. It came through an invitation issued by Indian filmmaker Amar Kanwar, whose film Such a Morning was premiered at Documenta, I think by now a year and a half ago. And with it came an invitation to mine that which we do not know, that which is dark. So hence the subtitle of the series as a curriculum for studies into darkness. In our current climate here in the US, it seemed unavoidable or particularly important to look at the notion of freedom of speech as something that is fundamental to how the public sphere is defined and mobilized in this country, and an area that is also under very severe threat here at the moment, and certainly elsewhere as well. So ruthless erosion of speech into hate speech in form and give urgency to our series, a crackdown on civil liberties and a crackdown on the freedom of the press, certainly here as well or more so than ever before and elsewhere. And at the same time, we find ourselves in the midst of rather exhilarating developments and movements such as Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, or something like New Red Order. So freedom of speech is that darkness, that area that is pertinent, urgent, and that we want to understand better with your help and the help of our fantastic speakers. Very briefly, I'd like to remind you that this is the third seminar. The first one was a mapping of the territory, and we looked at various aspects of freedom of speech and how the right to freedom of speech is also the confinement to the right of freedom of speech for someone else. The second event was dedicated to feminist manifestos and raised questions about the systems we move within, how we are implicated in them, how we can take our positions of adversary or oppositional positions, and whether the idea that you step outside the system and claim a right to free speech approaches a situation and position of privilege that not everyone shares. So out of that discussion came questions on comfort and discomfort, the need or the suggestion why we should embrace these conflicts, and then also a very clear pushback from some of the speakers saying that is not always a choice, and there is not always the possibility to embrace discomfort because the risk can be more extensive and more serious than just discomfort. Anyway, this brings us to today, and I just want to thank very much our partner organizations. I'd also like to thank the team at the Verlis Center, headed by Emily Donnelly and accompanied by Nina Olivetti and Gabriel Lopez-Dena, the partner organizations I mentioned. And tonight, big thank yous to Article 19, Quinn McHugh, who is the Deputy Executive Director, and Judy Tying, who is the moderator for the talk or for the conversation. Now, you have in your programs, you have extensive bios. You also have the summaries of the previous seminars. But I just quickly want to say very briefly who we have on this incredible panel. And maybe I'll start in the order that people will be invited to speak. So Molly Crabapple is on the very right, an artist and writer, author of 2 books, Drawing Blood and Brothers of the Gun, which was longlisted for the National Book Award. Your writings have appeared in the New York Times, New York Review of Books, the Paris Review, Vanity Fair, and many other places. Molly's work is collected by the Museum of Modern Art, the United States Library of Congress, New York Historical Societies, an extraordinary range of collections and museums dedicated to your work. And we will hear from you first. The following speaker is Julia Farrington, who is right next to Molly, freelance arts producer and consultant, and an impact producer for documentary films. Since 2005, Farrington has specialized in artistic freedom, working at the intersection between arts, social justice, and politics. Farrington was the head of arts at Index on censorship for 5 years, and since 2014 has continued working with them as the associate arts producer, with focusing on truly pioneering work on censorship and self-censorship in the arts in the UK. Internationally, Farrington has been active with and working with artists and organizations in Myanmar, Belarus, Ethiopia, Turkey, Somaliland, and many other places. Farrington is also a member of the International Arts Rights Advisors Group and will present at the College Art Association later this week. Nancy Schwarzbaum is a documentary film director, producer, media strategist who uses storytelling and technology to create safer communities for women and girls. Her debut feature documentary, Roll, Red Roll, focused on the social media-fueled culture that led to the notorious Steubenville, Ohio high school sexual assault case about 3 or 4 years ago. 2012, 6 years ago, yeah. The film premiered in 2018 at the Tribeca Film Festival and has won 6 feature film awards already. It will be broadcast as a season opener on PBS's Point of View and on the BBC's this year. Nancy is also working with international partners to launch an impact campaign to engage men and boys in the prevention of sexual violence. One more thing, globally recognized human rights activist. Schwartzman has served on Vice President Biden's Advisory Council for Violence Against Women and has also created the White House's award-winning mobile app Circle of Six, designed to reduce sexual violence among America's youth, that is now used by 350,000 people in 36 different countries. Deborah Brown is next and is sitting to Nancy's left, Global Policy Advocacy Lead for the Association for Progressive Communications, APC. APC is a non-governmental organization and a network of members in 72 countries that works at the intersection of human rights and technology to advance social justice, women's rights, and sustainable development. Brown focuses on internet rights advocacy and fostering good internet governance in UN processes to advance international norms and hold governments to account. Previously, Brown worked at Access Now, the United Nations Foundation, the National Democratic Institute, and so on. Shaunae Micheline Holloway, over there, is a new media artist using sound, video, and performance to shape the rhetorics of technology and sexuality into tools for exposing structures of power. Shaunae has spoken and exhibited her work internationally in spaces like the New Museum in New York, at the Sorbus Gallery in Helsinki, Finland, the Kitchen as well here, the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. Currently, Holloway teaches at the New Arts Journalism Department at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago and is actually in town, just having come from a conference called Refiguring the Future, which was presented at IBEAM. So I'm very glad to have you here. And last, it's a real pleasure to introduce Judy Taing, who is our moderator and leads Article 19's international portfolio on sex, sexuality, and gender rights. She's developed and spearheaded Article 19's cross-country gender strategy, the MX method, or mix method, ensuring that intersectionality and equity are at the forefront of the organization's global strategy, operations, and international processes. Taing specializes in countering religious intolerance and hate speech, protection of human rights defenders and environmental activists, access to information, and is currently focused on combating technology-related violence against women. She has regional expertise in Southeast Asia and has designed and led large-scale projects in Cambodia, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Prior to joining Article 19, she worked at the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges at the UN's assistance to the Khmer Rouge trials in Cambodia. And with that, finally, pervasive and personal, and thank you for coming, and thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It really is an honor to be co-hosting this event with the VLC and moderating this amazing panel. The main purpose of this seminar is to unpack how technology has impacted and altered the ability of women to exercise the right to freedom of expression. Now, this may seem like a pretty straightforward topic. However, as our discussion will prove, it's incredibly complex, at times harrowing, and at times deeply empowering. I have been leading Article 19's work on this issue for the last few years, but that's not to say that this is a new issue. Unfortunately, violence against women has long existed. It's a historical issue and it's also a very present one. But technology is reshaping power relations and gender dynamics, and this has implications for how speech is exercised online and by whom. At Article 19, our work on the topic has centered on coordination and mapping. There are so many resilient women, LGBTQI persons and allies, including our speakers today, that have been tackling online inequality and misogyny and conducting research for years. So our aim at Article 19 is to bring all of this together and to track, almost at a forensics level, how abuse occurs. So the who, what, where, when, why, as well as the channels in which abuse lives and how it travels through the architecture of the internet and the real-life consequences that this has on gender expressions and internet freedom as a whole. Because we really truly believe that women's ability to express themselves online has freedom of expression implications for society as a whole. So this is not just a singular issue, it's not a women's issue, it's a societal issue. And it's been an overwhelming task, and we found ourselves asking way more questions than we have any answers. So over the years, the questions have just piled and piled and piled, and I think we're struggling to find some of the answers to it. And so some of the questions that we've been confronted with and are still asking and still looking for solutions to is, how are women creating agency online? What tools and tactics are being used and to what cost? And this varies from context to context. We have offices around the world, and not one experience in one region within one state with one person is the same from the next. And that's what makes it really, really difficult to understand. And also how the internet is used, what type of devices are used, it varies, and this also then changes our ability to analyze what is happening. And also the consequences. So it's also individual and hyper-personal, given how contextual it is. The other question, who are these attacks coming from? And there, again, we find no set answer. So it varies from context to context. It can range from the state to non-state actors. It could be religious groups to work colleagues to, in some contexts, family members and intimate partners. And how about geography? How does geography factor into all of this? A singular incident can span many different countries and continents and jurisdictions. So how do we handle a case where an attack originates in country A and is received in country B and travels through technology where the servers sit in country C? So how can the law respond to this? Does the law even have a place in responding to a situation as such? And what happens when attacks are shared onwards and amplified? So this is what's particular about looking at violence against women online, is the sheer volume and the amplification possibilities and potential of the internet and the immediacy. So you can get thousands of attacks within a minute or within an hour, and occur when you turn on your phone in the bathroom or in your bedroom. And this is what's particular about technology and how violence against women has been extended online and how technology is being used to facilitate that. So in all of this, who is responsible for handling attacks? Where is regulation and accountability? And that's the big question. Are we looking at states to respond to this? NGOs? Are we looking at educators? Are we looking at engineers and software developers? And oftentimes, the spotlight goes back to companies, as it should, because companies play a big role in this. But here's another question. Do we trust companies? Do we trust Facebook and Twitter to be the regulators of online content, to be the gatekeepers, and to be the people who determine what is appropriate and what is not? And I think a lot of us can feel deep down in our guts that we don't really trust them. And so what do we do then? Especially when the culture in Silicon Valley we know is hyper male and it's not friendly to women. And I'm saying that as an understatement. So the problem gets even more complicated. How do we then assess online content to determine when an attack happens and how it should respond, or when there's gender expression and we're using our bodies to express ourselves and wanting to put that online? How can this be determined? And based on the sheer volume, this is being given to machines. But again, do we trust machines? And machines have to learn from somewhere. So where are they learning from? They're learning from the engineers. And who are the engineers? Again, we go back to Silicon Valley and the demographics of Silicon Valley. And so machines are learning biases. And a good example of that is facial recognition technology. Many of us have devices now that has that capability, but research has shown that actually it's way more secure for white male faces than it is for any other face. And so it's not an equal security mechanism because it is being built and based off the architects, which sit in Silicon Valley and tend to be heteronormative cisgender white men. And also, the next question, sorry to keep throwing questions on you guys, but how about anonymity and encryption? These two tenets of the internet are very empowering in some of the most oppressive contexts, enables people, dissidents and activists to speak out. But then when we're looking at online abuse and online attacks, these same tenets can also be veils for people to hide behind and for attacks to be conducted with impunity. And then, last but not least, there's the rapid pace of technology. So as we sit here right now, engineers are creating new technology, new algorithms are being built, new devices are being built. And so how do we keep up with this pace? Because the minute one thing is built or one thing is altered or one piece of code changes the way that we communicate, the whole risk landscape shifts. So how do we as civil society, journalists, artists, keep up with this and stay ahead of the curve in terms of knowing how to use the online space safely and securely? So here we are, to speak on a hyper-complex, deeply personal, and a super urgent issue that is rapidly evolving. So the purpose of all these questions of this seminar is not to overwhelm, as overwhelming of an issue as it is, but it's rather to identify how we can start creating space, the kind of space that promotes diversity and inclusion. And as we see online, the space is oftentimes co-opted and being used for the antithesis for what we want. We were seeing a flourishing of hate speech, a flourishing of just viewpoints that are going against diversity and inclusion, and a spike in xenophobia. So how do we create the kind of space that we want? We certainly are doing it right now by giving this issue a platform here at the New School and speaking about it. But then the question is, how do we replicate what we're doing right now online? How do we keep building up the space and making it sustainable and having it grow along with technology? And that is the challenge, and that is what we're here to speak on. So to start, I just want to open the floor to our speakers and also ask, has the internet been a liberalizing force? Has it been experienced equally? And before we answer, I want to urge all the speakers and participants to have a conversation. The talk is formatted to be interactive, so at any stage if you have a question or comment, just raise your hand and we will integrate you into the conversation. So just raise your hand and just try to keep your comments brief, just so that way everybody can have a space to speak. So just to start off, big question to the panel. In terms of the internet, do you feel like it's been a liberalizing force? Do you think this is experienced equally?
Liberalizing force for who?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that yes and no. And I think that the early internet was incredibly liberalizing. The internet of, nerds and dorks and, but that once the internet especially started getting co-opted by state actors, it's increasingly become a tool for really, really, really authoritarian, especially like populist demagogue type governments. But I mean, I'm someone who did a book with a journalist who I met when he was in Raqqa, which was occupied by ISIS at the time. And we were able to, talk because of WhatsApp and because of Twitter. And I think about the fact that that would never have happened before without the internet and the potential the internet has to cross borders that would have been otherwise impossible to traverse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any?
I mean, on a smaller scale in terms of, I made 2 films about the internet, and one was a very sweet one about 2 really unlikely people meeting and falling in love before the age of apps. But really I wanted to explore how the internet can be a bridge for sort of lost souls or teenagers trying to understand their identity. And a South Korean art student in Manhattan can fall in love with a homeschooled Christian boy in rural Illinois, and they both had their own, barriers to just expressing themselves and getting to know who they were and stuff like that. And so that was a very kind of sweet understanding and look at how it is hard to communicate and explore your identity, and just this freedom to do it on an online platform and, disguise your voice if you don't like your accent via text and language. And we'll talk more about the film we'll talk about here. And that's certainly, the internet was a huge force for exploding a topic onto international stage. So.
Yeah, I mean, an analogy that I tend to give when I talk about the internet, when I'm like at work and doing trainings or speaking to other people, is that I tend to see the internet like a knife. not, to go with the pun of being double-edged or whatever, but just to say that it could be a really useful tool, right? Like you can use it to cook, you can use it to cut down things, and it can be really practical. We all need it in our life, but it can also be hyper dangerous, and in the wrong hands, something that can be used against you. And like that's just kind of how I've made an analogy with it. And I agree, Molly, with what you're saying, that it's a question of who, right? Who uses the internet? And what we're seeing, like in terms of my work, and I'm sure everybody else's work here on the panel, is that the who is major. And not just whether you're a woman or what your sexual orientation is, but just also where you live, the legal context, the economic context, the political context. It really does change as to whether or not the internet is free or not. And the state definitely getting involved is a huge factor, and we're seeing, like, for example, in my previous work, like the Vietnamese government sending people to China to learn on how to like have a surveillance team. So it's definitely like a proactive, concerted thing now as well. And so the who matters. And Molly, you have actually written an article that really focuses on an individual and her experience, and this situates itself in Iraq. And so if you can like please share with us the story you've written and share with us this situation.
Thank you. I wrote a story about a young woman named Tara Fares, who was the 6th most popular Iraqi on social media. She was the queen of Iraqi Instagram before she was murdered last year. And to me, the reason I was so interested in her was she was someone who had seized upon the internet's possibilities for self-definition and for carving out a life for yourself in a way that you perhaps wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And so this is a piece I wrote about her for the New York Times. On October 9th, the Iraqi author Sinan Antoun tweeted, "Killing those who are other/different has become a ritual/hobby, practiced by individuals for fun after having been institutionalized by the state, political parties, and militias for years." His tweet referred to reports that an Iraqi teenager had been butchered on a Baghdad street by an assailant who thought he looked gay. But Mr. Antoun could have been referring to any of the young Iraqis who've tried to break free of the rigid social codes governing both genders, only to suffer vicious reprisals. The most famous of these victims has been Tara Fares. When she was killed in September, Ms. Fares, who had 2.8 million followers on Instagram, was the 6th most popular person on Iraqi social media. At 22, she was a self-created celebrity who mixed sexy fashion shoots with video diaries in which she fired back at her conservative critics. Ms. Fares was shot dead in Baghdad's Camp Sarah neighborhood while riding in her Porsche. When I read about Ms. Fares's murder, recognition hits me like a punch. Though I'm 13 years her senior, when I was her age, I also worked as a scantily clad internet model. I also reinvented myself on social media, posting endless photos of myself, trying to build a following that would somehow translate into something more. Back then, qualified only for menial jobs, I also saw my looks as a fast-closing door to freedom and used them as best I could. But I am in the United States, and she was in Iraq. The stakes for Ms. Fares were far higher. Her courage was of different magnitude than mine. Ms. Fares was born in Baghdad into a Christian family that converted to Islam when she was 6. Her parents married her off at 16 to a man she described as traditional and violent. When her parents caught him beating her, they took her back into their home. She was 19 and soon discovered she was pregnant. After she gave birth, she said, her husband sent armed men to take their son. All Iraqi men want a woman to serve them, wash their clothes, devote themselves to them, but they do not ask you to have feelings. It is tantamount to asking you not to be human, Miss Fares later said. Perhaps before, perhaps after her divorce, she started modeling. The first Miss Iraq beauty pageant took place in 1947. The winner was a Jewish girl, Renee Dagor. The pageant closed shop in 1972, though unofficial pageants continued in less extravagant forms until Miss Iraq officially restarted in 2015. Ms. Faris made her debut in an unofficial pageant in 2014 in a bare, overlit room at the Baghdad Hunting Club, whose contestants were extraordinary only in their ordinariness. She was baby-faced and wide-eyed and won runner-up. Around this time, she began to post selfies on social media. "I never thought they'd become viral," she later said on YouTube. "I felt powerful from all these replies of love and hate. I started to feel that I was strong enough to choose whatever I wanted, to dress the way I saw as correct, because it is my choice and my life after all." Ms. Faris left for Turkey in early 2015, determined to find success as a model. In the Instagram account that made her famous, kicked off in May 2016. In her first post, she sports an Adidas baseball cap and a pout and describes a nightmare about a car bombing in the caption. "I saw blood, I saw corpses, but the strangest thing, I saw my body thrown onto the ground. #follow Tara Faris." The juxtaposition of hot girl and horror garnered her post 15,091 likes. Ms. Faris's likeness remains repeated in this internet hall of mirrors, swathed in a hotel robe, getting her hair done on Eid al-Fitr, playing video games, flaunting her intricate tattoos. She traveled across the region from Beirut to Doha to Amman, posting increasingly slick and stylish videos of her adventures. In a self-produced mini-documentary, actors whisper her name as she trots into a hotel lobby. The legend reads, "Tara Faris, glamour queen." She sports skimpy clothes, designer bags, blinged out nails. She is her own woman, mimicking the aspirational lifestyle of the westernized ultra-rich. Men harassed her online and in the street. Women, too, denounced her. When, on an Iraqi YouTube show, the host asked about rumors that she did sex work, she denied it and then mocked her accusers. In a video diary, she berated an unnamed cleric who offered her a pleasure marriage, a temporary union unique to Shia Islam. After rejecting his proposal, she declared, "Tara Faris has more honor than the members of parliament and the Iraqi politicians, because Tara doesn't swear at people. Tara doesn't speak in sectarian language. Tara doesn't suck the blood of the Iraqi people." Ms. Faris was based in the city of Erbil, but she traveled frequently to Baghdad. Her love for her hometown was evident. 4 months before her murder, she tweeted, "I have always been proud of where I come from. I never feel shame for being from a city inhabited by war and destruction." The murder of Miss Baghdad is a big headline, and in death, Ms. Faris made news around the globe. On Iraqi social media, some praised her as a free woman. Some mourned the killing of a harmless model. But to some others, she had earned death because of her immoral behavior. A few days before Ms. Faris's killing, Suad al-Ali, a women's rights activist, was shot dead in Basra. In August, Rafif al-Yassiri and Rasha al-Hassan, two beauticians and prominent figures on Iraqi social media, died in mysterious circumstances in Baghdad. Some Iraqis see connections between the deaths and fear that extremist militias are killing these outspoken and outgoing women. The murders remain unsolved, and questions remain about their deaths. The militarization of Iraqi streets with armed men at checkpoints and the proliferation of militias has created new mechanisms of social control. The sociologist Zahra Ali wrote in the aftermath of Ms. Faris's murder, "Violent patriarchy may have killed Iraq's Instagram queen, but in her brief, vivid life, she seized the internet's possibilities for self-determination. In death, she remains an irresistible icon."
Thank you for that. In reading your article, I was really struck by that last statement about how even though it was violent patriarchy that ended her life in the end, that she still found herself and was perhaps her truest self online. And also something that I found quite interesting about the situation of Tara Faris as well is the whole online offline aspect, right? Like there's a relationship going on between what she's putting online and the persona that she has online and the reality of her life offline and the impact that has. In terms of writing that, Molly, I mean, I don't know if, I'm just curious to know, like, how did you feel in writing that piece as a fellow, women online? We all have online presences. Like, what impact did it have on you writing that?
I spent a lot of time, I'm so short, hear me better this way. I spent a lot of time listening to these video diaries that Tara Faris made. I was very frustrated because many journalists in America that cover the Middle East don't actually speak Arabic. And so because of that, they wrote about her in this incredibly bland way, like Miss Baghdad shot, that's it, right? And I was like, this is a woman that made infinite video diaries. This woman said a lot of things about everything. And that was something that was worth, amplifying. I wanted to, amplify her voice, not just, her beautiful photos. I think the thing for me that struck me as someone who really, I wouldn't have an art career if I hadn't been able to be an internet model and make that sort of money when I was young. I don't know what I'd be doing, probably retail or something. So I felt a lot of, solidarity and a lot of relation with her ambition. She's someone for me that really showed what the internet could do in terms of freeing someone from constraints that they otherwise would have had. She's a working class woman. She didn't have a university degree. She was divorced. She had a kid. In any sort of pre-internet world, she would have had a very limited, constrained life. But instead, because she was able to define herself as, Tara Faris model, Tara Faris, glamour girl, and even, do it in a very transgressive, scantily clad way, she was able to actually have a future, She clawed out a future for herself. She clawed out a life that she actually wanted, and that was free because of the internet. And so I thought that was very important to talk about, especially when in telling her story, people focused so much on, the internet had killed Tara Faris, the dangers of the internet, and they didn't talk about the fact that, no, the only reason you even know who Tara Faris is because of the internet.
I'll also take this off too, because I'm short as well. Anybody in the floor or in the panel, if you guys have any comments, let me know. I don't want to have a one-way conversation. But yeah, I do find that very powerful. And sometimes, in working on this issue, I also find the challenge of talking about the severe issue at hand, which is the fact that she was murdered. Yeah. Right? And how to put spotlight on that and how to find solutions on that without just focusing on her death. Right? And to pay tribute to what the internet has allowed her to do with herself. So that's also a challenge in working on the issue and talking about it too. And that's why I think that your piece was great in terms of highlighting the entire context of it while still paying tribute to what the internet has enabled her to do.
Exactly. The internet certainly couldn't save her, but she was also someone, who was violently abused by her husband long before she was online. It was, violent patriarchy that killed her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people and groups that have worked in this says what you see online is indicative to what's happening offline, right? It's a harbinger of either future attacks or attacks that are already happening, an indication of it. So if anything, it's just unveiling the reality of her life and what's happening. And sadly, what's been happening with Tara Faris is it's endemic, right? And it's experienced across the board. It doesn't matter if you don't have to be in Iraq to experience that kind of severe attack. And that's the unfortunate aspect of the internet. Nancy?
Also, I'm jealous that you guys don't have a cord. We do. Thanks. Sure. So much better. But there's also, discussion about when you're visible, you're safer, right? So obviously she was amplified and was able to have this life, and she was already escaping abuse anyway, so who's to say that wouldn't have happened to her you know, 10 years later with a different husband or something. So there is something really powerful about being visible, being on a stage, being vocal. And I know activists talk about this a lot. Like, do we go dark or do we stay present? You know, whether it's safer, these are, you know, choices to make. So there's that power in the visibility.
Yeah, I kind of want to add that visibility is such a, I think, really controversial topic. In a book called Dark Matters, there's an extensive study on light as a way to like make things visible, but most notably as a way to track bodies. And one example in particular that always stands out in my mind is the person who wrote this book, whose last name is Brown, but completely slipping my mind, talks about this example where black folks, when slavery was happening, like when it continued to happen, were sent out into the dark with a candle. And that always, like, and with a candle, thinking that, like, if you could see the black person moving around, like, other people would be safer. And that always, like, sheds this interesting light on, like, if visibility really does make you safer, who is that visibility for? Especially also, like, visibility making you unmistakably you, right? Because also, someone pointed out the presence of the government kind of like infiltrating the internet, and does that make us safer? Do we want to hide, et cetera? The internet has kind of moved towards this thing where you can't not be you, right, in many different ways. So I'm always thinking about that in connection to the analog, right, because the internet is technology, but what other technologies make us visible in that space, and who is that visibility actually the safest for?
Yeah, and in terms of our work, Article 19, we have a pretty big protection program. And visibility sometimes is a tactic that we use to increase security, and sometimes it's something that we avoid to increase security. It really is contextual. It really depends on the context. Some governments, you know, with increased publicity about what they're doing will back off, and in some places it will just put a spotlight on someone. And I think in the context of what we're speaking about here, visibility is everything. And I say that in terms of it being a positive thing. But what we're also seeing is that one singular person making themselves visible, it's difficult as an individual to withstand the onslaught of attacks that can come with the internet. So the question is, how do we create this critical mass? How do we, again, like going back to what I said before, create this space where we're all in it together, and it's not just one person in one oppressive context trying to shift norms and change perspective.
I wonder then, in reflection in that, if we're not actually wanting to talk about legibility versus visibility. Because I think there's a nuance there. Because to be legible is to be understood, which is a certain type of visibility. But to be visible is just to be seen. And
yeah.
You don't have to be legible to be.
No, agreed. And then now we're opening up another door, right, in terms of the self that's presented and what's visible. Are you creating it yourself, or is someone creating it for you, or is it a perception? But in terms of this issue being an endemic one, Julia, you've conducted some amazing research to pull out some trends and some statistics about this experience of social media harassment and online harassment, particularly for artists. And it'd be great if you can share with us some of your findings.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think I also start off with a story about a particular individual for whom visibility is desirable. She's an artist, but also it brings with it heightened dangers, and that was the sort of interesting position that I wanted to bring here. And sorry, I'm just going to read this. So I met artist photographer Yumna actually through Molly in London in summer 2017. She told me her story of online harassment following the publication of her photographic series, Northern Yemen, comprising 10 images of different Yemeni women wearing a full niqab and hijab, captured in powerful stances in beautiful Yemeni landscapes. Yumna did a lot of interviews, and many press outlets picked up on the story. In return, she got death threats, rape threats, was sent screenshots of her home via Google Maps. She was stalked, and her harassers threatened to watch where she slept at night. She no longer felt safe in Los Angeles, so she left and now lives in London. Yumna, like many artists, depends on the internet to reach her audience. She has nearly 52,000 followers on Instagram and rising. But she's come to realize what a monster the internet can be, especially for women and for a woman artist of color. The reality is we're not getting jobs as easily, so we have to self-promote a lot, and that puts us at risk. Self-censorship is a reaction to this insane new force, she says. There are so many Arab and Muslim women who are not sharing their work, and that's something we have to speak about. Yumna, who is resilient and tech-savvy, self-described as nerdy, took steps to look after herself, boosted her digital security, tweeted about harassment, erected firewalls, spoke about it to the media, took time out. But despite these moves, she felt very unsafe and became depressed. I didn't want to tell my roommates that someone had found our house. You hear the same kind of responses from rape victims. You feel ashamed. You feel it's your fault, that you're being dramatic. But that's abuse, right? She didn't know about civil society and the kinds of support she might have got there. And it didn't occur to her that she, as a poor artist, might have been able to get legal help, that her aggressors were breaking the law, and that she might be protected. Yumna's story prompted me to talk to other artists and arts organizations to find out if any arts associations had developed guidance and realized that there was nothing out there specifically directed to help artists. There is more for journalists and human rights frontline defenders, but even though artists are often doing related work, they haven't the training or the expectation of professional support mechanisms. Concerned that online harassment is leading to widespread self-censorship, International Arts Rights Advisors, which is a small group of consultants that I'm one of, with Svetlana and others, carried out a survey to assess the need and understand what gaps needed to be filled. It is a broad brushstroke survey sent out through our networks. Respondents were self-selected. There was no geographic or demographic methodology attached. Our main interest was to get a sense of how pervasive it is, what kind of impact it was having, what resources people had used, and what more was needed, and to be able to demonstrate that beyond the anecdote. We had 133 respondents. Interestingly, the largest single group were writers. There were 47, followed by 32 film directors, 31 cultural practitioners, 28 visual artists, 20 actors, with smaller numbers of musicians, dancers, and poets and other disciplines. The vast majority, 80%, used the internet to share, promote their work, interact with their audience, and connect with other artists. 70% of the respondents had received different kinds of online harassment, rape threats or threats of sexual nature, non-consensual posting, derogatory and offensive statements. The largest number reported receiving offensive and threatening statements directed at their gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, age, political beliefs, or social status. The majority of this group feared that the threats could lead to injury or harm. Many took actions that impacted on their professional life by stopping work temporarily, censoring their work, coming offline completely for a period. Roughly half said that it had no impact on their professional life. In terms of psychological or emotional impact, most reported becoming anxious or depressed, and a large number limited or stopped using online platforms for personal purposes. Difficulty knowing who to trust, feeling ashamed, not feeling safe to leave their house or attend events, and problems sleeping were common experiences. Just over 25% of the respondents said they experienced no psychological or emotional impact. In terms of who they consulted for support, around 50% didn't consult anybody or seek any kind of support. Of those that did, the majority sought out fellow artists or cultural practitioners. Some found online legal and tech guides, tech company support. 13 went to the police, 11 sought legal advice. Only 35 of those who sought advice said that it was helpful. When asked for reasons why respondents didn't connect with available resources, 27% said they were not aware of any resources that could help. 12% found resources but didn't find them relevant. 9% were afraid of reprisal. 50% ticked the not applicable box, which aligns with the 50% roughly who had previously answered that they had sought no support at all. Sorry, lots of figures there, but we're getting a picture. Finally, we asked what kind of help was needed. Asked to tick the top 3 out of a list of 6 options, the top scores went to information about rights and legal protection, guidance on how to respond to or survive online harassment and abuse, and then guidance on how to protect yourself from online harassment and abuse. Other recent unpublished research came up with similar indications, that friends and family are a very important resource, so it may be a matter of spreading useful information more widely so it reaches a larger population. Again, a significant number did not know support was available, and language-specific, country context-sensitive information was not necessarily available. Although online information is useful, the bottleneck seems to be that people don't know it's out there and or it is not tailored to their needs, art form, language, situation. The standout findings for IARA are that 50% of respondents who had been harassed didn't seek help at all. So that isolation, that sense that there's nothing out there, is a really pervasive experience. Only a small percentage, on average 16 to 20%, sought advice or support beyond friends and fellow artists. And well under half of those found the advice useful. So even those that are going out aren't getting anything that really helps. A significant number of respondents were unaware of resources, or the resources they found were not relevant. Also, that the largest group was writers, suggesting that artists in other media are less connected to our networks at least. So there's work to be done. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can build on the work already out there. But we do need to adapt it to different art forms, countries, languages, and jurisdictions, which is very much what you were saying. We need to increase our understanding of the specificity of the link between online harassment and self-censorship amongst artists, and in particular to build our knowledge base about women's experience and the instance and impact of abuse at the intersection of gender, race, and religion. Who is at greatest risk, and what is therefore needed in the way of resources? We're working in a fast-changing landscape. The excellent toolkits PEN America's Online Harassment Field Manual for journalists and writers and Doc Society's Safe and Secure for documentary filmmakers have both appeared since the survey. There is potential to draw on the considerable strengths of both sets of guidance and reframe them to the needs of performing, visual artists and other less represented art forms. Also, since the survey, many artists, including Yumna, are facing a new challenge to expressing themselves online in the form of social media platforms' new terms of service. In response to calls to remove imagery ranging from the extremes of criminal child pornography to the vagaries of content that may offend, social media companies have introduced new regulations to remove adult content and nudity. With 4,000 images being uploaded onto Facebook per second, for example, this is a humanly impossible task, so it has been handed over to AI to do the majority of the work. Although exceptions are made in the terms for nudity relating to artwork, some artists, particularly those using photography, are finding their work being removed by what are unavoidably blunt regulatory instruments. I spoke to Yumna last week. She's removed herself from Facebook and Twitter entirely because it was total nonsense. This move to ban the female body is very problematic in a society where conservatism is trying to control women's bodies. We need artists and women artists in particular to be heard in these current and urgent debates. What are the responsibilities? I'm sorry, I'm going to come up with lots of questions too at this point. What are the responsibilities of social media platforms with regards to the content posted? How would the picture change if they saw themselves as publishers? What kind of collective action is possible when artists connect with journalists, writers, documentary makers, human rights defenders, academics? How can we together push back on relentless torrent of abuse, which is silencing people, pushing them offline platforms, and further reducing the diversity of online voices and expression? And how about the deeper underlying forms of abuse against freedom of expression being enacted against all who use social media in the age of surveillance capitalism? What can we do at this critical point in time to ensure that the tech giants work in our interests rather than lining us up like so many ears of corn ready to be harvested for our data? A bit dramatic at the end.
Totally understand the list of questions. And I don't know if anybody in the panel or in the audience has answers to those questions. But in terms of speaking about these social media companies you raised at the end, you know, like, are they our friends or are they our foe, right, in this kind of situation? And we're starting to see, like Molly, you said at the very beginning, that it's starting to shift. We're starting to see it start from something that was very liberalizing and they were our friends and giving us space to something now where it's becoming a lot more sinister, especially with the kind of information that they're taking from us and how they're using it. And I think a lot of this is leading to self-censorship. Like you gave the example of Yumna. And I wanted to pose the question to the panel in terms of this kind of knowledge now about these giants, these companies becoming giants, and the impact it has for your presence online and how you use those spaces. we're finding in our work that a lot of women, and not just women, but speaking of women, are reverting to self-censorship as well. So what Yumna is doing in terms of saying, I'm done with this platform, it's not a friend for me. I don't want to give it time or space and to validate it as taking herself online. And we're seeing that as an act of protest, but there's also ramifications from that too, to not engage in these platforms, right?
I just have to put that. I mean, she has stayed. She's opted to stay with Instagram.
Okay.
And so she does still have a presence, and she's actually very pro-internet. I mean, she's someone who really does see this as a space worth fighting for, and dedicates a lot of her energy. Why she's very keen for her story to be told, and for it to be a sort of catalyst for conversation and trying to find ways of pushing back against it. Because she doesn't want to have, an internet that's riddled with tripwires and no-go areas, and you have to pay for and do this and do that. She wants it to be a free space, but she's very conscious of its limitations and how it affects how she is forced to self-censor in that space.
Yeah. Yes, in the back, please join us.
Hi, I'm Derek. I just wanted to pose a question because you were talking about how social media, it's controlled a lot of the ways that we send our self-censorship. And I was thinking about what was your guys' opinions on social dating apps like Tinder and Bumble. Where on Bumble, if a male is interested in a female, he can like her, but she has to send the first message first. The men on the app are not allowed to send the first message, and females are free to ignore those messages. And I just wanted to know how these dating apps are starting to change, and you can pay for specials like that on different apps, and choosing who you can choose to sees you and how they see you. I just wanted to know what you guys thought about that, and how that's changing the way things are viewed a little bit. Huh?
I missed that. Does you have to pay for sex?
So I can't talk about dating apps because I've never used one. But I often think about how the specific archaeology of Twitter, because I think this is really a question, right, about how specific UI and information architecture kind of programs us, right? So I often think why does Twitter in particular have such a incredibly hostile, toxic, thing? And part of that is that Twitter is optimized for engagement, and what's a better way to engage people than have them checking did that person say something horrible to me? Oh, I'm going to own them. Oh my God, all the followers have piled onto them. Fighting basically is the lifeblood of Twitter, and that's why they're never going to make it less toxic. And the specific thing, and I didn't have this insight myself, my friend Clayton Cubitt did, that Twitter could do to make itself less toxic that it will never do. There's one easy trick. On most other social media things like Facebook or Instagram, if someone writes, I want to rape you to death with a tire iron under your picture, you can delete that. Whereas on Twitter, you can't, right? If someone replies to you, I want to rape you to death with a tire iron, that just stays there forever, unless one of the moderators decides, to take it off. So people can build whole brands on Twitter by harassing women, and there's nothing they can do about it. Instead, Twitter has chosen this very feeling-centered thing where you can block it so it doesn't get into your head, but you can't stop them from building off a brand off of threatening to rape you to death. And I think it'd be great if Twitter would allow you to unattach replies from your posts. I think that's the single biggest thing that they could do to stop these basically alt-right accounts that have built their fame on harassing other people.
Just to pick up on that, the question of who, and with the internet and social media platforms are liberating for who, I think also the question needs to go back to also who's designing, who's developing, who's moderating, who's regulating those platforms. And the point that Judy made about the lack of diversity is a really gentle way to put it, but the fact that the people who are designing these platforms and moderating them and regulating them are often the sources of patriarchy and are very much reflections of the power structures in our society. So to look to these tools to be liberating is almost like looking in the mirror on society, and I don't know how we could expect that to be different than how society looks, which isn't to say we can't be creative and create alternatives, but I think those design choices very much reflect the values of the people creating them. So I think that's just a point that we need to kind of put out there. On the dating apps, I'm not an expert on this at all, but I do know from research done in different parts of the world where, for example, being LGBTQI is criminalized, that those platforms like Tinder have had to work with those communities and kind of learn the hard way about the risks that they're putting their users at. I think one example from countries in the Middle East and North Africa was even just having the app visible in your phone is a threat, and so they made an option, I think it was Tinder, to Grindr, to make that invisible on your phone, so that if authorities or family members saw that, looked at your phone, they wouldn't immediately see that. So I think there's definitely choices and conversations that can happen with the people who are affected. And then just to go back to the question or the points around withdrawing from platforms, in many ways that's a privilege. For journalists who need stories, that's how they get them. For artists who want to put themselves out there, that's their audience. And for a lot of people in parts of the world where the internet's offered through platforms like Facebook, Facebook is the internet, that's how they access it, so it's really not an option to just withdraw from them. So yes, absolutely, we should put pressure on Facebook and companies to change their policies. I think a lot of this goes to their business model, and at the end of the day, is this changing these issues and matter to the bottom line for them? I think not. But we also have to recognize that people use these platforms, and to withdraw from them is a privilege, and that's not one a lot of people in the world have.
Yeah, and to quickly go on dating apps, can't speak on some of them as well because I also haven't used them. But in terms of some of the work that we've done, our MENA team works with Grindr proactively to adapt the way that they build their app. So that way it's not just with Silicon Valley Western conceptions of what relationships are and how relationships should be. And they're actually one of the better dating apps in terms of going, hey, you know what, we have a responsibility to our users. And we actually do not know how the relationships are in these contexts. So we need to like deconstruct what we think of relationships and allow our users in those contexts to reconstruct it. And so that's one example, but not every dating app's like that, you know, and I think that's one of the harms of how technology is created. You know, it's created in a bubble, in a context, and then the minute it goes live nearly globally. And so an example of how Grindr has been misused is that it has been used for entrapment. So police officers would go onto Grindr and pose as a user and try to solicit and get people to write in messages to admit that they're gay, and then once that's done, then they can then go forward with criminal proceedings or blackmail. And so that is the implication of creating something in, you know, Silicon Valley or in the United States and having it go live in the Middle East. And so that's kind of what we're speaking on in terms of how it shapes relationships. So these companies do have a responsibility, and some are better than others. And I think the amount that it's good are very slim.
I just want to say I use dating apps. I like Bumble in particular, this one that you were talking about. And I want to take it back to Yamina. You said, like, one of the things you said she really pushed back against was no-go zones. And I think, again, let's take it back to the early conceptions of the internet as being this Wild West thing, right? Where like there was really, should we take this out too? Yep. Yeah. There was really these no-go zones that happened, but the whole thing ended up being, I'll get back to Bumble, but the whole thing ended up being a no-go zone because nobody was privileged enough to like understand how to be like, open bracket, HTML, close bracket, open bracket, head. You know what I mean? Like no one was able to access that in a practical way. So nobody was able to benefit off this freedom. So when sort of the move west, the move into the internet happened, like I call them homes or shops or just like civilization or whatever comes up, and Bumble all of a sudden comes into this like Wild West, whatever. And there are rules when society happens, et cetera. But these no-go zones, like these paywalls and things like that, this is one rule that I think is actually helping a little bit. Bumble cuts down on the like, hey, you there? Hey, dick pic. Hey, this will last for like years. If you've ever had like a Tinder match from a year ago from when you were in France, you'll like know that they'll like still try to sleep with you when you're like 8,000 miles away. Right, totally, let's go. But, you know, if we're going to inhabit these things, like how can we use these no-go zones as a way to help us, I guess. That app does get really sticky because it is reflective of our society in the sense of like women don't have to be bothered by men, but like what happens if you're like not quite a man or not quite a woman and you're like over here, like how does that work? On Lesbian Bumble, we get to talk to each other like whenever, however. Do I get, hey, can I touch your pussy? Hey, yeah, I do. So who knows?
I just want to throw out that the founder of Bumble was a former person at Tinder and was very high up at Tinder and kind of got screwed over by Tinder and left and founded Bumble and is a woman, right? So that is just like the tiniest glimmer of why there's like less dick pics on Bumble, because it's actually like a woman who designed it for heterosexual interaction. And just briefly, as a tech founder, we created Circle of Six app, and we're actually collaborating with Article 19. Our app was based for US students. We have hundreds of thousands of users and made not $1 because we wouldn't sell data. And in 2016, we moved to encryption with the Guardian Project. And basically, as a tech founder who has hundreds of thousands of users and responsibility to them, you know, it's nobody wants to give you money if you're not going to, you know, screw over your users. So it is really key about like who's designing the tool. It was like me and a queer colleague and other kinds of people, and like really putting in an anti-violence tool that doesn't track your users. It doesn't use surveillance, because that's actually often used against you if you're in an abusive relationship. And like the app kind of blew up 7 years ago under Obama and Biden. And then there were all these copycats, like women's safety app, and like, boom, we're going to track you. And oh, here's a panic. And, you know, it's so badly designed by people who had never worked with survivors or abuse survivors. So it really does matter who's in the room when they're building the tools. And it's amazing how few of us are actually in the room. So
I had a comment I wanted to make on the idea of safety online. A lot of times when people are talking about like the safety of women online, what they're talking about is like rape and death threats, and to a later, lesser extent, revenge porn. I'm here to say that like I don't care about individual rape and death threats, to me personally. I mean, you know, I think that they're evil, but I've had my photo posted on one of those Nazi sites with like the Jew star, and I've gotten like thousands of rape and death threats, and it doesn't really matter to me because it's not going to actually happen. The thing that I actually think is incredibly dangerous that's happening now is coordinated smear campaigns. The alt-right does this all the time. You see a lot of coordinated smear campaigns, against like black intellectuals, for instance, against people who support, Palestinian rights, against women who think video games should be more feminist, against all sorts of different demographics. And a lot of times those smear campaigns are much harder for people who are concerned with women's safety to deal with. Because like if someone says very explicitly like they want to rape and murder you, that's pretty easy to flag, right? And everyone knows that's bad, and you'll get sympathy. Whereas if someone concocts an elaborate story about how you stole GoFundMe money, that's something that actually has the potential to take things away from you love, like your career and your friends, and the potential to actually hurt you and socially and economically isolate you. And it's much harder because it's not saying any of the bad words, So I think that when we think of online safety, we need to take those type of smear campaigns more into account, even though they don't, they don't say that they want to rape us to death with tire irons, which is still bad. No one should do that. I'm just not personally hurt by it.
Yeah, and I totally agree in terms of having a full understanding of how threats and attack exist online, right? And there's a whole spectrum of how they look, and a good section of it is insidious, right? And you can't look at it and be like, this is an online attack against women because it's economical. It's like trying to like squeeze her out of her job, trying to make sure that she has no supporters, et cetera, et cetera. And I totally agree with you. On the other end, like, rape threats and murder threats in some other contexts are actually like, people act on that too, right? And so it just really depends on like where we're looking. So if we're looking at like Uganda or if we're looking at the United States, it really does change how the speech is analyzed, I guess you can say, and the consequences that come with it. Anyway, I'm going to move the conversation forward because we can speak about this for quite some time, and to go back to Nancy and to speak about your film, Roll Red Roll. And in it, it's really interesting to see how technology, again, the duality, we've been talking about how it's been a liberalizing force, an empowering force, but also a place where hatred has grown and attacks are perpetrated. And so I think your documentary really clearly brings that to the fore through a singular incident. So in terms of how the internet was used to extend a harm and an attack, but also how it was also used to combat impunity. So if you can share, please.
Yeah, I'm also just wondering who's going to run the trailer. Oh, are we running the trailer? Okay, we don't have to do it right now, but I was like, where's the trailer going to come from? Okay, good. Well, it's interesting just even hearing about Alex. So the film tracks the Steubenville, Ohio rape case. It was probably the first youth rape case to go viral. The story broke in 2012 at this really fascinating moment when social media was prevalent, but people didn't really understand how it worked. So teenagers using it thought it was, LOL private, and it actually was super public. So they're talking about it, but it's early Twitter, and this was really the first case where social media was used as criminal evidence. So they're documenting and talking about a rape super publicly, and that might have been just, quiet and, left in Steubenville, Ohio, a town 50 minutes outside of Pittsburgh. But it intersected with a really incredible woman named Alexandria Goddard, who was, like many middle-aged ladies, a true crime aficionado. So she was a true crime blogger, West Virginia native, didn't go to college, self-taught on every level, and knew how to snoop around the internet. So she was lucky enough to get a job as a paralegal or helping in a legal office. So really learned her way around the criminal justice system, and really savvy woman who knew how to get deleted content and had lived in Steubenville for 6 years. So, she'd kind of check on what's going on in town. I used to date that cop and that bartender, and what's happening. And she saw there was a rape case with teenagers, and she thought, wow, okay, football players, this town loves football. And if these boys got arrested, something must have happened. Googles the boys, gets all of their Twitter handles, and just dives in and finds all of this content. And while most of it wasn't necessarily evidentiary, it was reflective of a cultural acceptance of the behavior. So she kind of started to get that blown up, got the attention of another woman journalist in Cleveland at the Plain Dealer. And then when a wealthy family in town decided to sue her for defamation of character, they got the ACLU involved, and then Anonymous found out about it. And this is before the FBI had infiltrated Anonymous. So this is one of their first white hat ops, and it blew the story up. So I think we can run the trailer. And I also am designing an impact campaign. I'd love to chat with you about it, but really focusing on men and boys, bringing, this is a film about rape that doesn't focus on the victim at all. It looks at the perpetrators and bystanders, because I had access to police interviews, text messages, and really we could see the anatomy of a rape and really put the spotlight on where it needs to be, on how these things are enacted and how the community supports the behavior. So the campaign will focus on men and boys and bringing them in to the solution.
There's pressure to get these kids guilty. Even if they're guilty of rape, that they didn't do this and that, I hope, that the truth comes out.
When I first read this story, there wasn't a lot of substance to the article. 2 high school football players had been charged. Just a couple of paragraphs about these 2 boys, and that was it. I thought, this is nuts because that town is so entrenched in their football team. This is big news. So that's when I started snooping around.
I had never seen a case constructed like this. That many people who have some information.
This was a sexual assault with teenagers, and the cell phones told the story. We had photos. We had 400,000 text messages.
It was on Twitter, actually. Song of the night, rape me. Some people deserve to be peed on. Just the complete lack of empathy. That was what was so frightening. I mean, it was all out there.
You're always going to get two very different sides, but this was just at another level. We didn't know exactly what happened, but we knew there was a lot of defensiveness about it.
I just didn't understand it at all, because I don't think it's something that doesn't occur in other cities and states and counties all over.
If teachers knew about it, if coaches knew about it, if a principal knew about it, if parents knew about it, why was nothing done about that? The question was, is this football town, putting its daughters at risk by protecting its sons in a situation like this?
Great follow-up. Thank you. You can all come see it. It's opening March 22nd at the Film Forum. We have a 2-week run, so everyone needs to come, please. And the Film Forum, the seats are really comfortable now because they redid them. We had 400,000 text messages, and Alex Goddard was really careful about what she put out online. So we all know Anonymous loves to release information, even if they're doing a white hat. They might release incorrect information. They might release the victim's name by accident. They don't care. It's just a dox, and it comes out. And sometimes that kind of illumination can be helpful. Very often it can be harmful. So a photo from this case that I don't include in the trailer, but it's in the film, that went viral, is of the victim being carried by the two perpetrators, and that was the image that was broadcast all over. If you would recognize it if you saw it. The reason you don't see the victim in it is because the blogger pixelated out her entire body, and Alex is a survivor herself and is very aware of what the internet does to people, and was like, this photo needs to be seen so people take this seriously, but I'm going to protect her in every way that I can. And, other news outlets had run the photo and not done that, So I think it is really important, like, who has the tech tools, who understands what's at risk on the internet. So while the town was shaming Jane Doe with tweets, et cetera, it also worked in favor of blowing the case open. So it's really complicated. Alex was harassed quite a bit, my blogger. She was sort of pushed offline. So there's repercussions, obviously, to being a whistleblower. And certainly making a film about a town where the whole town doesn't want you there, which was my joy, and is about to get even hotter as we go much wider into release, is its own thing as an investigative filmmaker or any filmmaker. You choose to do this, and like, who is it for, and how do you weigh the greater good about exposure and stuff like that? So it's what we're thinking about.
And I think an interesting question that I want to raise now, because when we talk about this, we talk about being at the receiving end of attacks and how that feels and impact it has on our speech, but how about looking at ourselves as bystanders, right? Because Alex saw the news, saw what was happening, and took action on it. And so here's the uncomfortable question of, given the proliferation of all this kind of content online and what we're seeing online, what have we been bystanders and witnesses to, right? And how do we act on that? And I think that's a very uncomfortable question to ask oneself. Like, how do we stick up for one another, especially when there's repercussions? Like, Alex got attacked online too, and had repercussions on herself for refusing to be a bystander to this situation. So it's a tall ask as well.
There's a point. there's a point I'd like to make to that, which is about you as a filmmaker as well, because when there's a whole town that's going to be pitched against you, you are really a clear target for a smear campaign, and that actually discrediting you and discrediting the people you've worked with and the teams that you work with is a sort of quite well-known activity that's pitched against documentary filmmakers who are very often revealing unwelcome, inconvenient truths. And one of the sources that I mentioned in my presentation was work that's been done by Doc Society, which is an organisation that supports documentary film all over the world. It's got an office now in New York. But they've done some very, very good work called Safe and Secure, which is very much, a lot of it is looking at how you maintain your credibility when there are so many ways of pulling it down, and that there are some very pernicious ways of doing that on the net. And you can sort of really get someone's reputation to shreds if you know how to do it. And so it's stuff that, you know, it's really worth sort of checking into what they're doing. I know you know the organisation, but
well, they're my exec producers. Yeah, absolutely. But also that's where community comes in terms of like who are the first people I called when stuff was happening was you know, the director of the film about Gawker that got shut down by Peter Thiel, right? You know, let me talk to this director right now because I have, you know, things happening, and the way also that the legal system gets abused to silence filmmakers and journalists, right? First Amendment attorneys or like various firms who want to shut down pesky left-wing people. I think the other thing about online resources for offline harm and online harm. So after the election, I ran crypto parties, very 101. Crypto parties for artists, you know, crypto parties for like panicky whatever, because I love reading PDFs full of information. It's also completely terrifying. I need someone to hold my hand. I need someone to say, oh my God, you're terrified. Have some beer. Okay, let's get back to this. Here's 90 things to do to secure your hard drives, you're this, you're that. I'm gonna walk away and do nothing, right? So why don't you just like migrate to Signal? Let's do one thing, you know? So I think there's also like a human element missing from a lot of how we talk about protection or safety, whether it's smear campaigns or just locking up your tech. That can be very overwhelming and there's no space for that because, especially as a woman, I was new to crypto. I just Googled everything. And I was like, fuck this. Like, I don't need some guy explaining to me some shit. Like, I'm just going to go on Google and figure it out and like host some parties, you know? So there's that piece too, that fear around technology that as a non-coder, you know? Anyway, okay.
Laura, you have a question?
Kind of parallel to what you're talking about is also kind of and that is particularly specific to the internet and the way that the pile-on happens is kind of the fear of further exacerbating the situation by speaking out more when one is in a situation of being under attack, whether it's through a smear campaign or even the more traditional personal hate and violence. And I just wonder if there are ways that you all have seen of working around that, because there's that moment where you're not sure whether it's going to tip into something where complete and utter strangers are going to come at you, or it's just going to be confined to this one particular vein of the world. And I just wondered, given your collective experiences, how you see that working out, and in light of also this idea of maybe it's about being legible rather than visible, and, you know, really kind of thinking through that and how it might work in our favor to be more legible, but at the same time not understanding necessarily where those tipping points are.
Yeah, in terms of the terror, you know, and I think that's something that perhaps we kind of skirt around and we kind of talk about it and mention it, but we don't really like just focus on the fact that it's terrifying at times to be yourself online and to respond to attacks or abuse, and it just happens. You don't know who it's from, or sometimes you know who it's from. And that's something that we've been trying to figure out at Article 19. And we've been working with like APC, we've been working with Nancy, we've been working with all these different organizations on how do we create an enabling environment where someone can speak out and not be the lone wolf, right? And not put an another target on their chest by sticking up for themselves, because that does tend to lead to more attacks, is what we see happening. And so there are some initiatives going on that are happening. This is perhaps a good segue to go into Deborah, unless there's any other questions, because Deborah and sorry, I was gonna say we have solutions. We have an answer, some answers to your question in terms of what initiatives exist and what has been done.
Can I just add,
sure,
just to highlight thematics? The question that you're asking is about risk, and I just want to submit this thing of like, okay, there's risk that comes with interacting with a technology that allows you some distance from someone else, but that same risk is replicated like in every day, like just sort of walking out of your house. And I think that we need to sort of address other kinds of ways of interacting before we can even really address a risk on a thing that nobody even understands, even people, you know, that are like sitting up here talking about interacting with it every day. Yeah, so like just risk.
Yes, please. We'll take two here, and we have, I think, one more.
Thanks a lot. I want to bring up a couple of comments. One of them is about the elephant in the room, and the other one is about the, there was, some people might remember there was a clothing store called Sims, and their motto was, an educated consumer is our best customer. So going back to the first question of visibility and access, when Hillary Clinton was criticized for calling Trump supporters a basket half full of deplorables, she might have been underestimating the size of that basket. But in terms of access, a lot of the people who seem to be the base of Trump, do they have broadband access to the internet, or do they rely on things like radio? And so we're defining the material that they can get, and if they can't get the material that's everyone else is getting, then they rely on the material that they can get for free or with limited access. That's the first point. The second point is, I don't know how many people are aware of the fact that I have a subscription to the Times that I get through my work, but in order to get on, I have to prove that I am a human being. So they have these verifiable charts. There's a picture with, you know, cute, and they say, click on every picture of a lamppost. Well, I found out that that's really they're training artificial intelligence to be able to recognize. So we, for our free access to something like the Times or email, free email, we are basically working as trainers for machines so that they can know how to, you know, subtly pick out these things. How does that fit into the whole idea of what's being done to our democracy and the fact that if the leader of the country can brag about rape and abuse, then a teenager can say, well, if the president can do it and get away with it, I can do it.
I'm going to take the two more questions before we turn to the panel. Right, so yes, please.
First of all, thank you. You guys are brilliant. It's been quite head-spinning to listen to you all, and it's quite wonderful. I guess my question is kind of a reality check. What I hear you describing is a kind of set of Chinese boxes of sexualization of the internet that forces women to constantly reframe why they're being visible at all while they are attacked and possibly destroyed for being visible at all. And it sounds as though, and this is a reference to your film, that the only defense is cross-platform, because there are different rules with Twitter and Facebook and a documentary film. So the isolation that Tara may have felt on one platform might be balanced by Molly putting it out on another platform. So my question is, and I apologize if this is a little vague, but my question is, to what extent can a cross-platform approach be a form of defense?
Okay, and one more question off to the side, please.
Hi. Is there a financial disincentive for these tech companies to be taking steps that protect the vulnerable? I mean, like in the example that Molly used with the Twitter ads, if Twitter engineering clearly could take the leap to disconnect those two things, but if that helps the platform grow, is that part of why they don't?
Yes. Yes. But the goal of the platforms is engagement. And if that engagement comes in the form of having a coordinated trolling campaign about how Anita Sarkeesian is really a lizard, they are totally fine with that. Especially on Twitter, I think. Abuse and bullying is built into the platform to drive engagement.
Yeah. Traffic, clicks, advertising, I mean.
And just to add to that, there are some examples of activists effectively using the financial implications to get companies to change their rules and their moderation guidelines. So I think it was Wham who used pictures of rape on Facebook and targeted the ads that were appearing next to them and targeting those companies who were advertising to say, do you really want your company being advertised next to that photo? And that was able to leverage some financial pressure on Facebook to change some of their policies. But I think these issues aren't part of the bottom line. These aren't like financially an issue for companies, and B, when we see like how companies respond to states when they say, take this down because it's terrorist content, or take this down because it's copyright infringement, the stakes are much higher and the companies respond in a different way than for any of the issues that we've raised here, I think.
Yeah, especially on this topic, when we talk about it with Facebook or Twitter or Google, we kind of get the same folks saying the same things. So they have like pre-scripted, like this is what we're doing, this is how we're addressing it, and it doesn't really change over years. Nancy?
Just to answer, you know, when we're talking about what's free, right, and who has access, like I can't answer to like, there's a lot of underserved areas in the United States that actually don't have pipes. Mostly Native American reservations don't have Wi-Fi for, you can drive for 2 hours. But I did a bunch of Get Out the Vote in Ohio, knocked on a lot of doors. YouTube. A lot of folks are watching. So if you think about two platforms that are free, PBS is free and YouTube is free. And I'd love it if the people's doors that I knocked on were all like, hang on, I'm watching PBS. I'm just watching nonstop PBS. I think we'd have a different voting block. But in terms of where a lot of, and there's been a lot of talk about this, I'm not an expert at all, but how algorithms are working within YouTube, they're just engagement, keep clicking, and it's like 5 clicks and you're in a conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And the particular one was right after Clinton's emails were released, and Huma Abedin, you know, the talk was she's a terrorist, and that was like, I talked to like 20 people with like crazed looks in their eyes telling me that Huma Abedin, I was like, what are you talking about? And it's like, it's on YouTube. You know, we don't trust anything but you. I'm like, okay, all right, we'll just register, you know. So anywho, just thinking about even where folks are getting information and what is free and how those algorithms work to keep you engaged, where that goes quickly is dark on YouTube.
It's not even about like access, I think, because I don't know if there's people you know who like just won't like turn off Fox News, even if they're like billion, trillion, gajillionaires and whatever. I mean, I think that there's a certain type of just basic marketing that like goes to certain people, and like it's easy to turn on channel 4 or whatever it is here, and that's it. And you do that every day, just like you turn on your coffee machine, whatever. And even if you replace channel 4 with channel 2, you're still not guaranteed that those people are going to like want to listen to anything else that would be off of not Fox News or whatever. And I think that just goes right back to Laura's question of like, well, you know, what do you do? And I'm like, you have to address this behavior and like way when you're like young, like education and like, I mean, you said the best customer is the educated customer, but you know, education starts at like 0. right? And I don't know if that should include like turn off Fox News or something, but like, you know, and I actually wanted to not just like forget about your question about a distributed network of, yeah, I think that that's brilliant. I will answer that directly later.
I'm going to quickly move on in the interest of time, and apologies, and hopefully there's time afterwards. We'll take more questions, but I think Deborah here will give us a semblance of hope in terms of what is being done to address this monster of an issue that's contradictory and has like many arms and many legs, and we don't know how to address it. APC has been doing some phenomenal work that has been picking up traction in terms of their campaign to take back the tech and their principles on a feminist internet.
Thanks. That's a lot of pressure. I'm not sure if I have any answers, but I can tell you some things we've learned in doing this work for many years. APC has been working at the intersection of technology and feminism and women's rights for almost 30 years now, working on the internet before it was really a public internet, and seen kind of the decline of how this space used to be one that was much more hopeful and now is quite dark. And I think one campaign Judy mentioned that I'll show a short clip from is something called Take Back the Tech, and it's something that dates back to 2006, I want to say, when a number of activists and people in our network were seeing and experiencing a lot of the things we've discussed here today. So online violence, harassment, seeing this space being cut off either through self-censorship or because the internet was seen as a dangerous place for women, and really wanted to use the internet to take back the tech, to actually reclaim that space and to use it as a space to challenge patriarchy, to you know, express themselves and just create more space online. So I'm gonna ask to just show a brief clip. It's not quite as sophisticated as the film that Nancy showed us, but just to give a sense of what the campaign's been about for the last, this is from the 10-year anniversary. It's around 12 or 13 years old now.
If the internet is ours, why doesn't it feel like it?
Decades ago, women from all over the world began to invest their creativity, energy, time, and knowledge into shaping the internet.
As their contributions remain invisible, the violence we face in our lives began to increasingly take place online.
In 2006, we came together, women like you, to take back the tech.
To reclaim technology.
To use the internet to help end violence against women.
Who are we?
Women, feminists, girls.
From Latin America, Africa, Asia, all over the world.
Lesbians.
Transgender people.
Young, old, and in between.
Designers, coders, artists, bloggers. In headscarves, jeans, short skirts, suits, or topless.
We are celebrating 10 years of
learning,
coding,
sharing,
creating,
playing,
exploring with technology.
Together.
We've trained ourselves and thousands of other women to use technology.
We've documented cases of online gender-based violence in different parts of the world.
We've called out social media that perpetuates and profits from violence against women.
We've helped women stay online and stay safe.
We've become storytellers through radio, video, murals, placards, and multimedia.
We've defended people's rights to privacy, autonomy, and consent.
We're taking back the tech around the world.
Own the web. It's ours. It's yours.
Wherever and whoever you are, take control of technology to put an end to gender-based violence.
So, as you can see, we've done a lot of work in this area. Obviously, the problem is still as present, if not more present today than ever, so there's still a lot of work to be done. But the URL that was at the end, takebackthetech.net, has a number of resources. It has research, evidence, it has roadmaps for how to combat violence against women in many different languages. And I should mention, this is something APC coordinates, but it's very much a distributed effort amongst people around the world. And so there's a lot of content in other languages, possibly for artists. Of course, everyone's threat model is different. But really, this is a way to have solidarity around the world, to share experiences, to help individual people stay safe, and to raise visibility for the issue. And I think over the years, that's actually probably what we've done the best at. Is I think for many years it was a struggle. This was seen very much as like a rich white woman's problem of politicians who are high profile or journalists, and not something that's actually part of every person's experience in different parts of the world. Everyone's experience is different, but it's definitely something that's pervasive, and even more so in countries where the internet's not seen as a so-called safe space for women, or it's seen as a place where people are harassed, so therefore a reason they shouldn't go online. And so in terms of some progress, we also do work on policy advocacy, so trying to influence national legislation, trying to influence companies' policies. And I think probably the one area we've had a significant gain in the last year was at actually the UN level. The Human Rights Council passed its first ever resolution on addressing online gender-based violence, which is significant because it actually recognized gender-based violence as a form of violence against women, like online violence. So it's not just something that you can dismiss as something that happens online, but actually part of states' responsibility to combat violence against women. Also recognizing the role of the private sector in their responsibility to respect women's human rights. So I think that's significant because for so many years there was very little traction on the issue, very little awareness that this is a global issue. Of course, like anything that happens at the UN, a lot of work is needed to make sure that that's more than words on paper, especially since we see even states that sign on to those resolutions are supporting, or actors who are affiliated with them are supporting targeted and coordinated campaigns against women online. So that's, I think, a real gap. But there has been some progress there. But after so many years of working on the issue, we saw a need to kind of broaden the conversation. So not just to look at combating violence against women online, but looking at how do we create a feminist internet? How do we imagine a feminist internet? What does that look like? And what do we need to get there? So in around 2014, we had a gathering of, I think, 50 people working at the intersection of women's rights, sexual rights, technology to get together and imagine a feminist internet. And this meeting was in Malaysia, and it was really to kind of bring together and have a convening and think about these issues. And I think, the primary issue, the entry point is looking at, again, the internet you can't look at the internet in a vacuum. We can't see what happens online and try to create a feminist internet without looking at how do we combat patriarchy offline. The internet's not an issue, it's a platform. And we also have to recognize intersectionality as the basis for any discussion because of the different forms and experiences people face online. And the principles aren't meant to be like something you can adopt or make a law out of, but really to start a conversation, much like the conversation we're having here tonight. And they've evolved over, I think there were 2 or 3 more meetings where these were discussed, and thinking has evolved over time. There are 15 principles. I won't go through them all in detail, but there's 5 clusters of principles, and these are really the framework that we use to think of the change we want to see in the world. The first is around access, both access to the internet itself, recognizing that women and LGBTQI people face barriers that are reinforced online, and accessing information, that information around sexual and reproductive health and rights or sexual expression is often censored, so looking holistically at the issue of access. The second is around movements. There's 3 principles there, looking at the internet as a space for resistance, as a space to build movements, and looking at the need for infiltrating, for lack of a better word, decision-making processes, whether they be at the governmental level, at the technology company level, at the engineering level. So in order to actually have better apps and have better outcomes, people need to be part of those conversations, not just consulted and then ignored after the fact. The third is around economy, so recognizing and interrogating the fact that the platforms we use every day often are huge monopolistic companies, and looking at alternative economies, alternative platforms, and also ways to support alternative economies through technology, and looking at FLOSS open source solutions as alternatives as well. The fourth cluster is around expression, and that's around amplifying voices. How do we not just be silent bystanders, but actually helping people who are targeted online, looking at sexual expression and combating the types of censorship we see by, I forget who was talking about the broad-based sort of policies that are censoring, I think it was Julia, expression online. Because it might be seen as pornographic or lewd or whatever the platforms decide on a given day is inappropriate. So much content gets wrapped up in that. So how do we, what does it look like to have, protect that type of expression online? And the fifth set of principles, there's a lot of them, are around consent, privacy, data protection, anonymity, youth, and safety. So recognizing the range of tools, of types of values that the internet needs to reflect in order to support feminist expression and combat and smash the patriarchy. So there's a lot more information on feministinternet.net. I encourage you all to go there. There's the principles in full, articles, and different types of tools there. There's also a website we run called Gender IT, which has long form and blogs and all sorts of articles around gender issues and technology. And I think, I mean, we've learned a lot over the years, and I think to go back to maybe Laura's question around how to engage, when to be visible, when to step back, Take Back the Tech, ironically, got targeted by Gamergate in 2016. We were, I think it was 2016, there was a report launched by UN Women and the ITU that was actually pretty bad, and was supposed to, it was the first UN report on combating technology-based violence against women or something like that. And they ended up having to take it down and revise it because it was so it was critiqued even by, you know, supportive entities. But Anita Sarkisian and I forget who else was at the meeting, and APC was there, and we were mentioned in the report. And we happened to be running a campaign around Take Back the Tech at that time. So they caught on to us. They infiltrated some of the documents we were working on, started coming to some of the meetings, did in-depth research on some of the leaders within the community, recording meetings, taking it out of context, publishing things online, threatening to come to an in-person meeting that was being hosted at something called the UN Internet Governance Forum, which is like not a very exciting place to be necessarily. So we weren't sure how seriously to take the threats, but because we were running that campaign and had encouraged our communities to, we had to make a decision. Do we stop it or do we go ahead? And that was a lot of internal conversations about, like, you know, this is actually proving our point that we have a need to take back the tech and to protect expression online. And we felt that as an organization and a network, we had kind of strength and visibility, whereas a lot of the participants didn't. And so as a result, it was much more of a consolidated or centralized conversation and campaign that year, because a lot of people felt like they couldn't endure the attacks that my colleague did, that they couldn't be physically and visibly online talking about these issues. So that was the kind of discussion we had to move forward, but to do so with the strength that we had for those who had it, and to respect that others couldn't do that. And then, of course, we took a number of technical measures to support the website, to reinforce, because we were facing DDoS attacks. Ironically, Twitter removed a lot of the images, the graphic, violent images that were targeted at us, so we didn't have it as evidence. So then we had to open then a channel with Twitter to say, please, this is actually important to our documentation and to building evidence and research. And I think eventually they were able to work with us, but some images were lost because of their content policies. So I think I'll stop there.
So I think what's interesting, trying to connect what we've all been speaking about in terms of the research that, Julia, you were working on, and how a lot of artists said that even if they were to have online attacks, they don't seek support because they don't even know that support exists. So there's clearly a bridge to build between the artist community and groups like APC or Article 19 in terms of the efforts that's being done. And I think a clear message that's coming across is that we're looking at such a monumental task, right, to stand up for this. Even organizations hesitate. Even organizations have to take a step back and figure out how to respond. And to go back to your question about creating a defense by being on multiple platforms, it's the perfect question for Shanae to answer in terms of how she has managed to create identity and agency online. And so we want to like conclude this conversation with the fact that there is agency online. We are pushing forward. We are creating campaigns. We are creating documentaries. We are creating articles, and we are creating ourselves online. And so please, like Shanae, if you can please share with us what you've done.
What do these platforms do? Because first and foremost, before I show you anything, I should just mention that my work is about structures, and in particular UI, user interfaces, how user interfaces can manipulate the ways that we're seen for example, I make it a point to be on Twitter because Twitter is something that you're allowed to express yourself via text, and Instagram, for example, because you're allowed to express yourself via personal photos or anything else. Tumblr at one time, because this was like sort of a working collage. Let's see, Zanga, anybody had that? That was a way to, express yourself via like your coding zeal or whatever else. And in some year that I don't remember anymore, I decided that this is slightly unrelated, but I decided I was going to become a cam girl. So like many of us that were sitting up here talking about putting ourselves online in a very vulnerable way. This is something I did. And I say this, and I'm going to show you work from that era, because this was a way for me to find agency. I live with a disability, and at the time I couldn't work. And so what did I do? I was like, well, the internet has done nothing for me but give me things. Why can't it give me money? And also at the time, and I speak about this like pretty extensively in interviews and things online, so I won't go into it too much, but at the time I was an art student, and I like was doing too much to support myself to like make art, and I said, this is silly, like art should feed me, this is really crazy. I was producing like hundreds of hours of video for clients online, whether that was like saying like, put the red beans in your shoes and then go outside and then turn around 3 times and you're really gonna like it, or what I was doing in this video was doing something explicit for a customer. I was taking all the footage I was being paid for and using it as, for my artwork, and I've actually sort of like never quit this ethic. Like all the videos that I've made are paid for by an external someone of some kind. And I'll play this. It's a whole like 5 seconds long. And in these videos, I was taking sort of the feelings of the I could full screen it, but I love it in this context, right? Because it lives here. But I was taking sort of the feelings that I was having while I was producing these videos and funneling them back into the artwork of things that I couldn't say to my customers. I look like this. This is not, or this is what I looked like, I guess, in like 2012. There were a number of security measures that I put into place trying to like do this sort of artwork, which is I put on a wig. I'll play it again. I put on a wig. I didn't really go out dressed like this in any sort of fashion, or like this was like my work wear. So I tried to separate like who I was sort of walking around with like an additive approach. So that was like probably 5 years ago, one of the earliest videos. That also, but creating these videos would also like give people access, like they thought that they had access to me in a way that nobody else did. Watching these on your screen are quite intimate. You don't want to talk about the fact that you saw this video about, like you saw me in class, like like it was just a whole thing, this network of people who only had interface with this artwork with themselves, right? So they automatically took to me as like the only person that could answer any questions about it, et cetera, which put me in a type of danger. How this relates to free speech and like the freedom that I felt there was actually like kind of zero. I mean, I never thought about it being like a feminist act to like go and do this, because I was always sort of like doing it, right? And sort of as I like got more and more in the art community, this work would kind of come back at me in sort of a negative way. So I started trying to think like, what platforms can I communicate on that are not just showing me in like a certain light? I created my own. Periscope was a thing. I don't know that it's a thing anymore. I was living in France. I used this as a way to keep in contact with people in the States at the time. And I did this thing called Before Bed with URL Bay. So I just took what people thought they knew about me, someone who like would give them like this sort of attention, even though I've like never spoken really to any, like most of the people who interact with my art, or I've also never taken off my clothes, right? So this perceived sort of intimacy, and I took it onto online, where I chose to speak for the first time. And I spoke a lot about Young Thug and like how he thought he was from another planet, and kind of refused to like engage with a sexual nature while I was in this like super like intimate position. And for me, that really was an experiment, because I'm all about trying to figure out how these interfaces affect the way that we see people, despite what we're like doing or not doing, right? To be able to like manufacture that that feeling. Here's like a small video. I would project myself in DIY spaces with my teddy bear, speaking from my real bed in Paris, but meanwhile I looked nothing like this, wasn't really even super femmy, etc., etc. Coupled with that, I would do online things as myself as well. So I would do things like Instagram takeovers and allow you into a sort of like behind the scenes view of me. And this actually is like the real Instagram thing, but as like time sort of passes, it corrupts, etc., etc. And these are also spaces that, you know, you perceive a kind of realness or a kind of immediacy, right? But I was constructing all of it to actually like place a barrier between me and the people watching. And as this is playing, I'll just go ahead and say a lot of the people that were watching these were like watching it on something as small as this, or like, you know, you couldn't see half of it. You were sort of romanticizing this voice. And every once in a while you would see these clips of me doing something, whatever. But as you followed the story more and more through things like that, and then knowing me on the internet, which we're still connected. Emily, are we still connected over here on the internet? Okay. You can follow me if you want. I'm Cleo Girl 25. But while that was happening, I'm like a hyper visible personality online. I would give you access to my art. I would like retroactively show you what I was doing, show you images like this alongside images. I took a bunch of stuff down, but alongside images where I would be like near a teddy bear or with head shaved, I would make appearances with you seeing me like you've never seen me before. And so you really have to follow me cross-platform to really understand what's going on. And I'll play this video all the way through. This was a place where like, I guess my identity online and real life kind of coincided, and this was taken off of a private, privacy password thing for today only, so I could show you guys. But this video actually doesn't exist for access technically. You have to pay to be able to see it. Anything that is personal to me, you have to pay to be able to see it or to be able to speak to me about it in particular behind a paywall. To be able to actually, you have to ask for that access, right? So consent becomes something that's extraordinarily important. So that video, I was very much like meditating on like, yeah, like who are we, sort of, who am I performing for? Who are we performing for? What is the best way to communicate that? Is it through text? I took it to YouTube because YouTube had this like really beautiful comment function, which is something that no other platform really does. So I was able to sort of comment on me, commenting on me, commenting on my communication for other things. And all this is to say, like, I use, has anyone in the room read Audre Lorde's Poetry is Not a Luxury? Yes, awesome, because I also sent it to you guys. Good job. I like to reflect on this text, and I'm going to read you like a short little bit of it. And while this is happening, I kind of want you to think about how being online in all of these spaces is a type of experience. These spaces are places to go and experience something else, to let it change you, to let it sort of like transform you. She talks about keystones for survival as being dreams. I am really bad in forgetting the other one, but dreams is sort of like really, I guess, central for me, because all of these places I'm dreaming of another way to try to, like, I don't know, escape a kind of like barrage of things, like assumptions, escape a kind of lack of money in some ways, escape judgment, escape the opportunity to not be able to like mute someone if I don't want to talk to them, escape just all of these things that lead to the lack of agency that we have. And poetry is how I think of the moment when you hit submit onto these websites. So at this point in time, I believe that every woman carries within ourselves a possibility for fusion of these two approaches as keystones for survival, and we come closest to this combination in our poetry read, in our submission to these algorithms. And I say submission as like both being submissive to and also hitting the submit button. I speak here of poetry as the revelation or distillation of experience, not the sterile wordplay that too often the white fathers distorted the word poetry to mean, in order to cover their desperate wish for imagination without insight. For women, then, poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, made first into language, then into idea, and then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest external horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives. And I there also think of the light as like actual light, from like emanating, the internet is made of light for more or less. Like light is something that is a reoccurring thing within this text, but also in the literal like metaphors for the internet and things like this. As they become known and accepted to ourselves, our feelings and the honest exploration of them become sanctuaries and fortresses and spawning grounds for the most radical and daring of ideas. The house of difference so necessary to change and the conceptualization of any meaningful action. Right now, I could name at least 10 ideas I would have once found intolerable or incomprehensible and frightening, except as they come after dreams and poems. This is not an idle fantasy, but it is the true meaning of it feels right to me. We can train ourselves to respect our feelings and to discipline or transpose them into a different language that matches those feelings so they can be shared. And where that language does not exist yet, it is our poetry which helps to fashion it. Poetry is not only dream or vision, it is the skeleton of architecture of our lives. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Are we okay on time? How's time? Okay. Well, we're out of time, but thank you for giving us additional time than what was initially in the program. Firstly, like that was incredible. Some of the stuff I had seen before, but what you showed after, like thank you, firstly, for showing that to us, because it's a privilege, right, for you taking down the paywall and letting us see it and have access to it. I'm sitting here like quite moved. I don't know if anybody else is, in terms of how we started the conversation, what we're laying out in terms of what the territory looks like for this form of expression online, expressing oneself particularly as a woman or particularly as someone who's non-binary and not like a cisgender heteronormative white man sitting in Silicon Valley. And as daunting and as overwhelming as it is, the list of questions remains. It's, for me, hopeful and empowering to see people still saying, hey, you know what, fuck it. I'm still gonna be, I'm going on that platform and I'm gonna make space for myself despite all the risks that we see and despite all the personal sacrifice that comes with doing that, and how to be creative with it and how to support one another and how to give life to someone whose life just got taken away, or how to like reclaim the internet and how to like really start taking back this space. So thank you to our speakers for sharing and educating and opening your lives to the rest of us and letting us learn. And thank you to VLC as well, and I'll just let Laura close.
Well, I just want to say especially thank you, Judy, for moderating this incredibly rich and dense and amazing group of people who have really, I think, shed a great deal of light, to take Shawnee's point, on the subject. And so just let's give them all a round of applause, I think. Amazing. And just to say, before you all leave, to remind you that in a month's time, on March 11th, we will be conducting our next seminar, which actually falls so closely in the footsteps of what we've just begun to talk about tonight that I encourage you all to really come back. We'll be discussing with a group of incredible people communication, language, the ways in which we speak or withhold our speech. There'll be a performance by Susanna Kite, who is an Oglala Lakota Indigenous person, and she will be doing an incredible program, an incredible performance about language itself. Aruna D'Souza will be here. Camila Janan Rashid will be here, who's an artist and an educator. Aruna D'Souza recently wrote a book called Whitewalling about race and art in the museum. Who else, Karen? Who am I missing? Sorry, I forgot my little list. In any case, it's all online. You'll find it on the VLC website where you found the freedom of speech stuff, and it's really going to be a wonderful talk, and it will take off straight from this point of departure. So thank you all for coming out tonight.